Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into one of history's absolute weirdest mysteries, the unbelievable story of the day the government literally erased time. Now, we usually think of time as, a fixed constant, right? The clock ticks, days pass, and our entire existence revolves around the calendar. But what if that calendar was just rewritten overnight? We're exploring an event that honestly sounds way more like science fiction than actual history. It's an event that sparked mass panic, total confusion, and accusations of the greatest theft ever committed. I mean, genuinely try to imagine this happening to you. You go to sleep on September 2nd, totally expecting to wake up on the 3rd, like any normal day. But instead, you wake up and it is suddenly September 14th. And no, you didn't fall into a coma and you didn't invent time travel. Your government legally mandated it. They just passed a law that completely skipped a massive chunk of the month. It sounds absolutely impossible in our hyper-connected modern world, doesn't it? Well, no way around it. That is exactly what went down in Great Britain and its colonies back in 1752. 11 whole days were just wiped clean from the calendar. Overnight, poof, they ceased to exist, gone from the historical record, gone from people's schedules, and completely erased from their lives. So let's get into part 1, the stolen 11 days, and unpack exactly how the government managed to erase time. Which brings us to part 2, the problem with time itself, and something called the Julian drift. Okay, to really understand the motive behind this massive historical time heist, we have to rewind all the way back to Julius Caesar. He's the guy who introduced the Julian Calendar, and for centuries, this was the absolute gold standard across Europe. It worked incredibly well for a long time. But here's the catch. It wasn't mathematically perfect. See, the Julian year was calculated at 365.25 days, which, as it turns out, is actually just a tiny bit longer than a real actual solar year. So every single year, the calendar drifted slightly away from the Earth's true orbit. We're talking an incredibly tiny error, just minutes a year. But you know how math works. Those minutes accumulated, century after century. And by the time we hit the 1700s, this tiny little glitch had snowballed completely out of control. The calendar was a full 11 days out of sync with astronomical reality. By the 1700s, that 11-day drift had some massive, highly visible, real-world consequences. The whole system was basically broken. The seasons, which obviously follow the actual rotation and orbit of the Earth, just were not lining up with the dates on the calendar anymore. Suddenly, the spring equinox was showing up way too early on paper. And because of this, crucial religious holidays, like Easter, which are totally based on these seasonal events, were drifting into completely wrong times of the year. The system was fundamentally broken, and something drastic had to happen to fix it. Moving right along to part 3, chaos, confusion, and riots. Let's look at the execution and the wild fallout. Let's zoom into 1752 and watch this turn into an absolute administrative nightmare. To get their dates aligned with the rest of Europe, who had already made the switch, by the way, the British government decided to just rip the Band-Aid right off. They made a shocking announcement. They declared that the day immediately following Wednesday, September 2nd, would abruptly, magically become Thursday, September 14th. That's it. No September 3rd, 4th, or 10th. Just gone. You can probably guess, the practical chaos this caused for everyday people was staggering. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. They literally could not believe what was happening. Imagine your birthday fell between the 3rd and the 13th of September. Well, too bad, it vanished for that year. Or think about the financial panic. Rent dates were suddenly thrown into total chaos. If your rent is due on the 5th, do you pay it now, or do you skip the month entirely? Legal contracts that relied on specific days for delivery or payment had to be completely renegotiated and rewritten from scratch. It was a literal logistical nightmare for a society that was definitely not used to sweeping, overnight bureaucratic changes like this. And the psychological toll? Huge. Time itself actually became a fiercely political issue. We're talking reports of workers out there demanding extra pay because they were genuinely terrified they lost nearly 2 weeks of hard-earned wages forever. Newspapers started directly accusing politicians of stealing time. And honestly, quite tragically, because the abstract concept of a calendar was a bit hard for a lot of everyday folks to grasp back then, there was this widespread, genuine fear that the government had physically shortened their lifespans. People literally thought they were going to die 11 days earlier just because those dates were crossed off a page. So naturally, all this anger hit a boiling point. Now, while modern historians do kind of debate if every single street riot happened exactly as the old stories say, there is absolutely no doubt that the public was furious. Stories spread like wildfire of angry crowds taking to the streets, raising banners and shouting this exact phrase, "Give us our 11 days." It became this massive political rallying cry against a government that, to them, seemed to be playing God with the very fabric of reality. Okay, time for part 4, the scientific truth, and a much-needed reality check. So, amidst all of that intense societal chaos and screaming in the streets, here is the actual truth. The Gregorian Calendar reform of 1752 was nothing more than a necessary mathematical correction. Literally, nobody lost a single second of their actual life. No wages were magically wiped from the universe. The reform was just fixing that historical drift we talked about earlier. Think of it as hitting a giant reset button to perfectly realign our human calendar with the undeniable physical reality of the Earth's orbit. It is absolutely crucial to separate the human panic from the astronomy here. The Earth, it kept spinning exactly as it did before. The sun rose, the sun set, the cows still needed milking, the crops grew at the exact same pace. Literally, the only thing that changed was the piece of paper hanging on the wall. This was just a vital overnight math fix to a deeply broken system. And if you're wondering why they had to do this, just consider the alternative. If they hadn't made this wildly unpopular, chaotic choice back in 1752, our modern calendar today would be a complete mess. Without this reform, our months would be weeks out of alignment with the natural seasons right now. Could you imagine celebrating the first day of spring in what feels like the blazing middle of summer? Or getting routine winter snowstorms in October? It was definitely a harsh medicine to take at the time, but it cured a systemic disease that was only ever going to get worse. Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, a bizarre historical legacy and the traces of the old calendar we still see today. Bringing this all back to the modern day, it is wild to realize that the echo of those stolen days still ripples through our world. You can still see the legacy of this historical oddity hiding right in plain sight. For instance, in parts of the UK, certain traditional localized celebrations are actually still held on their old pre-1752 dates. Plus, many Orthodox Christian churches around the globe never adopted this Gregorian reform for their religious calendars. And that right there is exactly why they celebrate major holidays, like Christmas and Easter, on entirely different dates than the Western world today. It's literally a living artifact of the time before those 11 days were erased. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought about what is honestly one of the strangest stories in human history. We all know governments have the power to change borders, start wars, and rewrite history books. But in 1752, they pulled off something even crazier. Millions of people watched time itself seemingly disappear by royal decree. It really makes you wonder, if a government can literally erase 11 days from existence just by changing some paperwork, what else about the basic structure of our daily reality is just a fragile, agreed-upon illusion? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I have a feeling this might just change how you look at the calendar hanging on your wall.